Hi, welcome to the channel where we provide an alternative view to the common narrative. Well, today's topic is still the Nord Stream pipeline. I'm going to talk a little bit about Seymour Hersh's article, but the main topic is about the fallacy surrounding the Russian gas supply to Europe. So if you are interested to listen more, please continue watching. Welcome back to the channel. Well, there is a recent revelation by Seymour Hersh about who done it on the Nord Stream pipeline. The sabotage of thereof is being discussed in the pro-Russian side or the alternative news system or sphere on the internet. And it seems to me that a lot of people have some reservation about the story. What is a telling tale about the whole story is that the mainstream media doesn't cover it. And if the mainstream doesn't cover it, then you have to have some faith in the story itself. Because that's a typical technique of propaganda, an American way of suppressing certain information. You just don't talk about it and hope it goes away. So the less you talk about it, the less it is in the public mind, the less people actually want to hear about it, and slowly the story slowly dies. But unfortunately, Russia has now decided to take the whole matter before the UN Security Council and is demanding an international investigation into the matter. And it is of significant importance that it is being done. Why? Well, you can ignore everything else about gas pipelines, Ukraine, and so on. But it is an act of international terrorism. That is basically what it is. A act of terrorism. And since the American government likes to classify certain institutions and countries as sponsors of terrorism, well, this is one that is being laid before their own feet. And if the matter is true of Seymour Hersh, then America is a state sponsor of terrorism, but not only a sponsor, but an executioner of terrorist acts. And that has a huge implications in terms of, not on the Western sphere, they are manipulated by propaganda, but on the so-called New South, the alternative multipolar polar world that is being created. And that is a huge dent in the credibility and the trust that is being placed in the American government. And like I said last time, who needs enemies if you have friends like this? There were some articles that pointed out to the revelations of the Russians when they investigated the bombing of the Kursk bridge. They did obtain some information or secret papers, and they have pointed out that the British Special Force or Navy were involved in the bombing of the Kursk, as well as the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. Somehow, Seymour Hersh's article doesn't cover that. What is also more amazing also is that the planning started in 2021. That means before the Russian SMO even started. And that means that the Americans never had any intention of preventing any war in Ukraine, and they were actually instigating it. What bothers me mostly is that if it's such a important operation, then secrecy must have been absolute tight. And it wasn't. And that bothers me a little bit about the story, and let me doubt the story a little bit. So there are things coming out that are not kosher. Then there are things that do support the story and the narrative. But at the end of the day, we need a proper international investigation. The question now arises, and that's a curious question, is whether America, Britain, or the West, or France, or whatever, on the Security Council is going to veto this investigation, or whether they're going to reject it out of principle. Because at the end of the day, it's an investigation of themselves. And that should tell you everything about who has done it. But I would like to deviate today from a little bit about this, because the main topic about this video is not about the sabotage, but this whole story about the dependence of Europe on Russian gas. And the narrative goes like that. Going a little bit a couple of years back, the Russians even have supplied gas to the European Union during the Soviet Union times. So it's not that Europe has not received energy, gas and oil from their so-called defined enemy. So this is nothing new. Business is business, money is required, resources are required. We make an exchange and we even trade with our enemy. And it has been a constant principle during the whole of civilization. But what it did have to do is, when the Soviet Union collapsed and so on, naturally Russia remained the biggest supplier of oil and gas and so on to Europe, and the whole relationship continued. And it was a very convenient way of getting energy resources, because the pipelines were laid, the oil and the gas was pumped through pipelines, which is a very, very efficient method of transporting these commodities. And what it helped is that it helped Europe to recover and prosper economically. And what Europe also refused to do is they refused to spend unnecessary money on any military expansions, because at the end of the day, military hardware and the military itself is a cost. It does not provide any income of whatever nature. It is a cost to the government. And we all know that Germany and all the other countries usually spend less than their supposed 2% as required by NATO on the military. America funded most of that, but in exchange, America abused NATO for its own international use. And we saw Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and all the other smaller conflicts as well. Serbia. So America benefited out of the situation, and Europe benefited out of the situation. Now the narrative goes that Europe, and especially Germany, has become dependent on Russian cheap gas and oil. And in my opinion, that is a fallacy. And the proof is in the current situation. Germany, number one, just as a statistics, and I've handled it in previous videos, only uses 38%, well, 38% of all heating done in Germany is done by gas. So that's not the majority for what the gas is used. Then, if you look at the power generation, the electricity generation in Germany, gas only forms between 14 and 16% of all the energy that is being generated in Germany. 46% of the energy is created by renewable energy. And about, I think, 29% is done by coal and coal derivatives. So as you can see, gas is not the most important commodity in the package of energy. So the fact is that Germany is crucially dependent on Russian energy is a fallacy from the start, from the basic statistics. So that is number one. And number two is, it was a beneficial reaction of a relation between Russia and Germany in terms of business. Both countries benefited from the trade agreements and the supply of energy. Germany needed the energy, well, the cheaper the better. And Russia has a lot of resources, and that is part of the income. But how is it that Germany would become dependent on Russian cheap energy? Is there any signs of that? Well, we see at the current events since last year. What has Germany done? They cut off all their gas supplies from Russia. And now they are importing the gas, liquefied natural gas, from other sources. They are not exporting any oil anymore. And they have put sanctions in terms of on all products like burning fuel and diesel and petrol and stuff like that. So within a year, Germany has basically decoupled itself of the cheap Russian energy. Now, does that sound like somebody that is dependent on Russian cheap energy? No, it doesn't. You see, that's the whole problem with the same as you can call about sanctions. You can do sanctions on a short term in order to try to hurt a certain country. But after a while, that country will have to defend itself. And the way that it defends itself is by either sourcing the products from other suppliers or developing the technology, etc., in-house. That's why sanctions have never worked. The stated goal was always regime change, but I don't know about any country that had a regime change due to sanctions. So sanctions don't work, and you can see it now what happened in China. They're going to develop their own technology in terms of microchip production and software and AI and so on. They're already the leaders on artificial intelligence. Russia, unfortunately, has no big microchip industry, but it can source it from China because they realize them good. But in a day, if I was Putin and I was Russia, I would at least have some research facilities, capabilities in terms of, say, technology of 7 nanometers or 11 nanometers and so on, chip production, so that I have the technology on a research basis, and if I wanted to, I can expand it to production facilities. But the whole chip industry is in any case so big, you cannot produce everything yourself. But I'm digressing again. We're talking about energy. So, coming back to the whole energy. So what actually Germany has done sometimes, when it still was receiving energy from gas and so on from it, it had a surplus of that, and then it distributed to the rest of Europe and made a profit. And that is all hunky-dory. Business is business. So the dependency of Germany on cheap Russian gas is a fallacy. It is not a requirement. If Russia ever exercised, and there was no proof or no history or nothing about Russia sanctioning anybody or turning off the taps, then you could have argued differently. But in all practical and historical contexts, Russia has always been a reliable supplier of gas and energy to Germany and the rest of Europe. That cannot be disputed, because the facts are the facts. So the fear that Germany would be dependent, let's call it Germany, but we call Europe as well, but Germany was the entry point, the major consumer. So if Germany became dependent on Russian energy, say, and Russia would try to close the taps, then it's nothing similar, then it's the same as sanctions. And I've talked about the sanctions just now, the effectiveness of it. They are not effective. They are just, call it antagonizing tools, if you want to call it. Then Germany would have been forced to find other sources. And that is precisely what it has done in the last year. So the dependency, there is no dependency. If I can, business is demand and supply. If you don't supply me, I will find it somewhere else. So again, this whole fallacy, that the whole story that Germany would have been dependent on Russia, that is a fallacy. There is some political motive behind that. And the only two things I can think of at this stage is that, firstly, America had a surplus of gas. They wanted it to supply to Europe. They couldn't because the Russian gas was cheap. So they couldn't penetrate the market, and they needed an offset for that product. And they needed income for the country, for the economy, because the economy is shot. Doesn't matter how you will look at it. So basically, it needed the market. And for that, it forced Germany and the rest of Europe to abandon Russian gas. Then we also had Norway with an interest. Then we had Poland that has an interest. And then we have the money makers on the TTF platforms, where they trade the gas on a spot market instead of long-term contracts. And that let the money flow again. And that's why we have all this fluctuation in gas prices. It was a spot market. So that's the one side of the story. And the other side of the possibility, that's a political view. I have said in my previous video, I don't believe Germany is a sovereign country. If you looked at the Potsdam Agreement and the Basic Law, at that stage, America and so on controlled the foreign policy as well as the trade agreements. And I wouldn't be surprised if they still do it. And that is why Scholz might look so weak, because he has no other options. And Merkel wasn't that much better, by the way. So it is America that controls the economy of Germany in terms of their energy supplies. And because they fear, they know that Germany, with its production capability, which America doesn't have anymore, with German technology, which is far advanced, and Russian energy sources, and maybe China's, together with China's Belt and Road initiative, and the huge capacity and development of China, these three countries would have formed an enormous, powerful bloc. And I'm intentionally leaving out Iran for the simple reason is that, yes, Iran also can't, but I can't mention all the names. But in any case, Germany, Russia, China, big, powerful bloc, end of America, very, very short time. And America just can't allow that. And those are the only two reasons I can think of at this stage why Russian gas was switched off. All the other stories, that is all hogwash. It's a fallacy. It's propaganda. It's trying to bamboozle the population who cannot think further. They can do understand dependency. Ooh, fear. Oh, we're going to be dependent on Russia. I can understand that fear. That's a way of motivating the population. But telling them, I'm sabotaging your cheap energy in order for me to sell my expensive products to you, that's a no-no. Nobody will actually support that. As you can see, they have to do it in this way because there is no alternative way of spinning the story. There's always an alternative to everything. There's always two sides to a story, never one side. It's like I said, it takes two to tango. And you can list some more of these things. So, coming back to the Seymour Hersh and the sabotage, it's going to be very interesting in the next couple of weeks to find out what will happen, whether the story will be further suppressed, whether the story will be expanded. I believe it needs expansion because not everything that is told in the story of Seymour is true. He did ignore the British, the Danish people. The fact that it wasn't such a secure operation that multiple people who were not security cleared knew about the thing. General soldiers that worked there that could observe all the stuff. Remember, soldiers always go home and tell their stories to their families and so on, and that's how it spreads. If they are not totally specifically informed, don't talk about this, then they will talk about it, and the stories will come out. So, okay, bad Chinese word, but we are living in interesting time, which is, according to Chinese, the reverse of what the actual word means. But we know that in any case. So that's my story for today. If you like what you heard, press the like button, tell your friends, subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Let's grow the channel. Leave some comments. And thank you for the people that do press the like button. I'm seeing slowly they are increasing. And until next time then, cheers.